Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how to sketch this frangipani flower using line and wash in watercolor. Today I'm going to continue working in the Moleskine Art Collection Sketchbook. It's got a weighting of 165 GSM. Equipment for today that we'll need: a spray bottle, a clutch pencil or any pencil, a 0.1 micron fine liner pen permanent, size 4 travel brush, eraser, palette for mixing, paint palette of colors, water tank and tissue for blotting. I'll also be using a sized 1 paintbrush for some of the smaller details, but if you don't have a brush this small, it's also not absolutely necessary. This is my travel watercolor palette. It's a small tin that opens up, has my 15 most common colors in, and I've also made a swatch card inside the lid of all the colors. Before we get sketching, I just want to discuss my thinking behind my picture choice for today, which also just shows my normal thinking process when I'm out travel sketching and looking for what it is that I'm going to paint that day. This avenue of frangipani trees is the inspiration for today's sketch. It is the street that approaches my home, and it makes me think of where I live and has inspired me to sketch today. But this is too big of a subject to sketch, and so then I started breaking it down into something smaller. I thought first, maybe what about a single tree rather than the whole avenue? That was still too complicated. So then I went in smaller and had a look at a bunch or a cluster of the flowers. This could also have been done had I had more time, but it's still a little bit complicated. And that is where I came to the point of settling on a single and individual flower that is still going to give me the thoughts behind what it is that I'm trying to sketch, and is a much more manageable size for a quick travel sketch. Here are the pages that I've already completed in the sketchbook so far. In previous lessons, we did the Thailand cover page, as well as the tuk-tuk and the scooter in previous lessons. As I go on to the next page, I don't want to duplicate the same layout as what I've done on these two pages here. So I'm just giving it some thought as to where I'm going to place my image. I think I'm going to put the flower in the top left here, maybe a bigger spread in the next picture at the bottom, and I'm going to put some text on the right after I've sketched the flower. Onto the sketching in pencil now. I'm going to sketch the flower, and if you're wanting to follow along with me, you can do so, or you can use the free downloadable PDF that is mentioned in the description box below if you're wanting to trace and copy the image. For now, I'm just going to take my time sketching each of the petals individually, making note of the overall size that I would like the image to ultimately be, and then firstly sketching out a light sketch of where I think each petal will go, just to make sure that it fits on the page. And as I'm doing now, I'll go in on a second time and just do a little bit more detail with pencil over the whole sketch. I can see that on the edge of the petals there are some veins that are very visible that I think will add a lot of dimension to the flower. So I'm just going to indicate the position of each of these veins that I want to make sure that I include in the painting stage. Now I'm going to start with my 0.1 sized micron pen. Make sure that the pen that you use has got permanent ink so that the paint doesn't cause the ink to run when we put the watercolor down. I'm going to start with a very light hand on my pen, just to make sure that the lines are light and not too rigid. I'm going to move quite quickly and do a basic outline using the pen on each of the petals. Keeping a light hold on the pen will just mean that the lines are not too heavy and solid. Now I'm going to draw my attention to the veins that start at the middle here. I don't want too thick a line for when I come and do the watercolor, so I'm going to work very lightly and just indicate the basic position of the veins on these top 2 or 3 petals. On this bottom petal here that is catching a lot more sun, and this one over here, I actually don't want to do the line in pen. I'm going to leave that in pencil and just let the paint do the work for me. Before we start the painting work, you can start by erasing any pencil lines that you don't want to be there. I've inadvertently erased the pencil line on this bottom petal, so I'm just going to add that back in. And today I'm going to use my size 4 Escoda travel brush. I'll start by spritzing the paints just to get them moist and ready to work with. I'm going to start with the yellow in the center of the flower, and I'll begin by mixing a light to medium consistency mix of Hansa Yellow Light and New Gamboge. I want to use wet and wet in the center of the flower here so that the yellow color blends out and doesn't have a solid edge. So I'm going to moisten the flower with clean water first, beyond the point where I want the yellow to go, before I drop the yellow into the center. Then I'm going to pick up that yellow, drop it in, and as you can see, a nice soft edge forms at the edge of the yellow rather than a solid line had I not used wet and wet. Now I'm going to make a slightly thicker consistency, adding a bit more New Gamboge, which is a bit more orange, just to drop in the very center of the flower where the color is a little bit darker and a little bit more orange. Just using my brush to soften those edges anywhere that I can see a line forming, just so that the blending is a gentle, soft blend. Make sure that your yellow is completely dry before starting to mix any shadow color with it. I'm going to mix together some neutral tint and indigo to form a base of my shadow color here in a light to medium consistency. Now I'm going to go in with a shadow color. Start on the first petal in the area where the shadow color is the darkest, making sure to leave the light part of that vein exposed. Starting on the shadow side, I'm going to lay down a little bit of the shadow color, then use water on my brush to blend the shadow color out towards where the shadow is lighter on the petal. Each time that I add water, the shadow color will lighten, so I might have to go in and add a bit more into the darker area to get that darker again. There's a bit of shadow on the edge of this petal here, which I'm going to add in. Just making sure to not go too dark and make the petal too grey. The same thing on the second petal here, starting in the area that I can see is darkest. I'll lay the darker color down there first and then use the water to blend it out. There's a shadow as the petal turns away from us here over the edge. I'm going to try and accentuate that by putting a bit of shadow color on the edge and blending it inwards to make the petal look a little bit three-dimensional, as though it is curving away and down from us. Just continuing adding more pigment in when I can see that the water is causing the color to dissipate. I'll just drop in a bit more on the edge here to accentuate that darker shadow color along the edge. And I'll repeat the same on the third petal, always having a look at each petal in turn and having a look at where the areas are the lightest and where they are the darkest, and just dropping in that shadow color wet and wet again to keep the edges of the shadows nice and soft into the areas that are the darkest. As the color blends outwards and mixes in with the water, I'll tap in a little bit more shadow color on the darkest side. And then again on this petal here, the light side is on the left hand side of the petal, the darkest side is on the right and towards the center. So I've dropped in a bit of shadow color in the middle and a little bit here on the right hand side of the petal. The last petal has probably got the most amount of light. There is a bit of shadow under that petal there, which I will accentuate a little bit later, but I'm just doing the base layer of the shadow here onto this petal into the areas that are the darkest. I'm going to keep building on this shadow area here, and so I'll drop in a little bit more, blending out the edge again just to make sure that I don't get a solid line. And also there's quite a sharp shadow on this petal here that the shadow is being cast from the one petal to the other. Again, I'll darken that area and blend it outwards. And now I will just keep moving around and try and get more contrast wherever I can. This a little bit under the petal here is actually not as dark as I'm making it, but I think it will give a little bit more contrast to the picture and accentuate the fold over of the petal there. So I'm quite happy with how that has turned out. And I'll keep on going back to the darkest areas of the shadows that I can see and just making the darks darker. This sort of contrast is what gives us more three-dimensionality to the picture and makes it look more realistic at the end. You'll see that I'm not adding shadow everywhere, more and more layers, but just in the areas that I can see are the darkest. Just dropping in a bit more shadow color into these areas so that there is more difference between these darkest areas of shadow and the lightest area of each petal that I can see. Now I'm going to turn to my smaller sized one brush to add a few extra little details into each of the petals here. This takes a little bit of practice. I'm going to make a very weak consistency of the shadow color and just practice making thin lines before I start. And now I'm going to add in a few lines on each petal. I'm going to start here with the central vein on this petal that I can see, and then just being very sure not to overdo it as I go through. I'm going to add a few lines on each petal, starting first with the central vein and then any other ones that I can see. I'm trying to make them not parallel, not constantly repetitive, just scattering them randomly through each petal just to get a little bit of texture. And also here I'm paying attention to where the fold over is to follow the same curve of the lines in the petal that I can see. Wherever I can see the lines on the petal, I'm following the same shape or pattern line that the lines are making on each individual petal. Whilst I've got this shadow color on the small brush, I can see that there is a darker shadow at the very center of the flower. So I'm just going to drop in some shadow color there into the middle and blend it outwards. Now that the sketch is completely dry, I'm going to prepare the shadow color for under the flower, mixing together some indigo and neutral tint. I'm going to work wet and wet again so that I get a soft edge to the shadow. So I'm just wetting the area in which I'm going to work. Then I'm starting at the darkest area of where the shadow is, dropping in the shadow color right into the corner here and the second corner by the table as well. This color is going to blend out and I'm going to help it to do so. But as I do that, I'm also aware that the shadow color at the very center there is going to get lighter and I'm going to have to come in and make it darker. But for now, I'm blending the shadow out and getting a nice soft edge to it. I'm constantly washing off my brush in clean water so that I don't add pigment to this, that I get a nice soft edge without any additional pigment on my brush as I'm blending outwards here. Things are drying a little bit here, so I'm going to add some dark underneath the petal where it's just touching the table there. That shadow is not going to blend too much now because it's quite dry. And now I'm going to go in again a second time on those darkest dark areas of the shadow, dropping in to the darkest areas that I can see, and once again blending it outwards. That's always going to give us more contrast and more three-dimensionality. I'm happy with how the sketch is looking now, so now I'm going to add some text. Using the 0.8 micron pen, I'm going to put a little bit of a illustrated heading. And then once I do that, I'm going to add a little bit of text as well. I do like to use guidelines because my writing doesn't stay straight, so I do just put the lines down to help me go straight, and then I'll erase them when I'm done. For the handwriting here, I then changed to a thinner sized 0.1 micron pen just to add in a bit of additional text. When I'm done, I erase the pencil lines, and there's the finished product. If you found this video useful, please click the like button below and hit the bell icon to subscribe. And do let me know in the comments section what you enjoyed and what you'd like to see more of. Until next time, bye for now.